So as we go through these pieces this morning, we'll talk about them in terms of the principle sets that are guiding them, right? Just because you're showing a principle set doesn't mean it's the only one you're using, right? So if this is an example of rhythm and repetition, is it also an example of some other principle set that you know of? Or if you look at that list on the sheet, it's asymmetrical, absolutely.
Positive and negative space.
Positive and negative space. So the idea being that what this artist is trying to put as the top item on the agenda is rhythm and repetition. So we have rhythm that's described as the effect of recurring or repetitious lines, colors, forms, etc. We have repetition, which is the use of a similar object, line, or color scheme over and over in the same way. Now, we're not going to use color at all for this project. In fact, I do not want you to even use grayscale unless you're implying grayscale with some sort of pattern in black and white, be it lines, dots, anything. And I'll show you some examples of that as we go through. But what I will ask you to do is to really own each of these design principles and to come up with solutions that illustrate them. So let's look at a couple of other examples. Now, some of the examples that I put in here are really strong compositions and some are not as strong, right? So these are 3 examples of rhythm and repetition. So of these 3 examples of rhythm and repetition, which do you think is the least successful composition? The middle one. Why? Who said that? Me. Faith.
It's not like.
Just say it. Don't be afraid.
It's not the same. Like, it's.
I don't know how to explain it. The only thing that really looks like they're repeating is the circle.
Okay. So they're definitely repeating, but they're not getting to the rhythm piece of it because it doesn't continue. And when we think about rhythm, we think of something that our mind can sort of digest as happening over and over again. Think of a piece of music, right? So if they were to add another circle, maybe even another circle with the dot motif, and that broke the edge of the page on the bottom, it would be a much more successful composition, right? Now, the one on the left certainly has rhythm and repetition. Agree? Yeah? Is that asymmetrical, symmetrical, or radial, that design on the left? Radial and symmetrical, absolutely. Right? So if we fold it in half, we get the same thing on either side, but the base of it is a radial composition, right? So for each of the 3 things that you draw, you're going to draw 5 thumbnails of ideas to use, right? And one of them I want you to really focus on using radial. One of them I want you to really focus on using an asymmetrical solution. And one of them I want you to work on using a symmetrical solution. So in this case, for rhythm and repetition, the artist on the left, these are all student works, the artist on the left chose to use radial as their solution, came up with 5 solutions of radial, and this was the strongest solution that they then rendered in Illustrator. Does that make sense? Now you'll also note that the one on the right, it certainly shows rhythm and repetition, but it's also a great example of what?
Symmetry.
Symmetry.
Oh,
Yes, even better. Positive and negative space. The second principle set that I want you to look at is contrast and elaboration. So very simply, contrast can be defined as the use of opposing elements, such as colors, forms, or lines, in proximity to produce an intensified effect. Does this design do that? Does it show you contrast? Yeah, what's the contrast? Shout it out.
Kind of in like the line weight and the shape.
Awesome. So you've got sort of line weight and shape and pattern happening in the foreground in those little wheels. They're like little gears.
Yeah.
And then in the background, they use positive and negative space and some bigger black areas to create a contrast within the composition. All right? Some other examples of contrast and elaboration, as well as, I don't know why the one on the right is showing up as gray to you up there. If you look on my screen, it's black. So I'm not entirely sure. So the background on the left-hand side is black. And then the lines that are used in the pyramid and in the shape underneath it, so solid lines and then broken lines, create the impression of grayscale. And this is a fine thing to use for this assignment if you want to get that sort of grayscale feel in it. It's much more impactful when the black is there, but could this design be changed to be even more successful to show us contrast and elaboration? What if in the pyramid, on the right-hand side of the pyramid, I used thicker lines, created a darker gray? Would it create more contrast? Sure. But it's pretty successful the way it is, right? By changing up line weights, we can create more contrast and elaboration. Now, the important thing to realize about elaboration, hopefully you're all noticing, Liz, you have the same image on the right-hand side that you just showed us for the last one. What's up with that? Right? But it also is a good example of contrast and elaboration for that same reason, right? It uses line weight. It also uses contrast of shape, right? The contrast of round, soft shapes and very pointed, triangular shapes. I don't want you to recreate the wheel in the designs that you're making. Working with really basic shape sets is very important a lot of times to getting our point across. Now, the one in the middle is an excellent, excellent example of elaboration. But it struggles a little bit with contrast because it's missing something that is very important to a successful composition. Anyone want to take a stab?
Focal point.
Yes. How could you make a better focal point here?
Put something towards the center, something bigger than the rest. All of the shapes are like the same size. There's not really one that sticks out more than the rest.
Okay, so the one thing I want you to move a little bit away from, because a real easy way to get a focal point is to put it in the middle, right? But look at that upper left-hand corner. There's the white square with the little circle. It's actually more of a rectangle, right? With a little black circle in it. Imagine if I just doubled the size of that and left it kind of right where it was, but balanced. That would create a focal point, right? Through the use of contrast and elaboration.